What up, what up? Welcome to episode number 27 of the Spun Today podcast. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz. Thank you very much for listening. And it is finally here. The lecture hall audiobook that I promised you guys like 2 or 3 episodes ago. The actual short story has been available for you guys to read. I'm not sure if you have yet. At spuntoday.com/short stories/lecture hall. And just like all the other short stories, I like to release an audiobook version of that short story. And I very loosely use the term audiobook because it's nothing professional at all. I try to make it, I read it myself. I edit it. It's not like the rest of my podcasts, which are unedited. And, I add sounds in it just to add a little color to the stories and to the experience. And hopefully you guys enjoy it. And if not, then I don't know what to tell you. Don't listen to them. Right now, I might sound a little bit out of it because I haven't had my coffee yet. And it's like 7 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, August 11th, 2015. And I took off Monday and Tuesday from work, just to break the routine, break the monotony, and we should definitely all do stuff like that every once in a while. I went to the beach with my boy Pablo yesterday. Shout out to him. Had a really good time. Went to Coney Island in Brooklyn, and there was surprisingly a lot of people there. I guess thinking exactly the same way that we were. But had a good time nonetheless. We try to do that like once a year. And it's pretty dope. You guys should definitely stop and look around every once in a while, like Ferris Bueller says, and enjoy shit, Just can't continue doing the same thing over and over again. Fucking go crazy. And what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, so I had been wanting to record, like I did the audiobook and edited it and finished it on, I want to say Friday night or Saturday, and I've been meaning to record like the intro and outro and put everything together since like Sunday. And Sunday something came up, and then Monday, yesterday after the beach, I was just fucking drained. You get completely drained, like with the sun and just like drinking and chilling, and just fucking tired and out of it. So I didn't do shit yesterday. And today I have a eye doctor, ophthalmologist appointment, like my yearly checkup thing, at 9 o'clock. So I want to get this out of the way now, the intro and outro, so then when I come back I can begin putting everything together and, polishing it up for you guys to have it on time by Thursday. Uploading it to Libsyn and doing all that jazz. And on YouTube too. Which, by the way, I did for the first time, which was really fun, and I liked it a lot. Not sure if you guys saw it. I released it as like one of the bonus episodes, kind of thing, like in between the bi-weekly schedule that we have here at the Spun Today podcast, and also on YouTube. The YouTube one came out dope because the one I released like on iTunes and Stitcher is just the audio, but you get more out of it if you see like the actual YouTube clip. I did like a promo, like a little theatrical trailer kind of thing for this lecture hall short story, and I liked it. It came out cool. It was fun to do it. I thought it was funny, and came out decent in my opinion. Obviously I'm biased, but I got so if you guys want to check that out, I've tweeted it. Check out my Twitter feed at Spun Today, or just go to spuntoday.com, click on the YouTube link all the way at the bottom of the page, and it'll take you to YouTube. And it's the most recent video that I've uploaded. Well, if you're listening to this, the quote-unquote video for this episode is going to be posted on YouTube as well, so it's the one right before. It's like a minute and a half long. guys can check it out there, or just look at episode 26.5. I called it, which is in your iTunes and Stitcher feed, which is the one right before this one. And like I said, it was fun to do. I liked it. I enjoyed it, and I thought it was funny. I got the idea from like another promo like type of thing that I stumbled upon on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken. It was for Grace and Gray, Grace and Gray series. It's called. It's like this 3-book series of this little American kid that fights terrorism. And it was like funny because it's like a 9-year-old fighting terrorism and stuff, and he's like in the middle of like a war kind of thing, and like at his camp. But just how they did it, like with like a legit, trailer, like coming attraction type of thing that you would see at the movies, which I love seeing those like trailers and shit. Like with the background music, the suspense, like music in the background and stuff like that, and sound effects and all that jazz. So it was pretty interesting to me. I got the idea from that, jotted it down, and then came around to finally doing it for this audiobook. And I'm probably gonna do it with the other ones too. I had fun doing it. It's something, I don't know, another method of fucking promoting it a little bit in like a fun way, which I thought was pretty dope. So check that out also, guys, if you haven't already. Appreciate it, and let me know what you think. Write in the YouTube comments, or when you guys go to rate and review this podcast on iTunes and or Stitcher, you can tell me what you thought of that promo there as well. And by the way, off topic, did you guys see UFC 190? Ronda Rousey's last UFC. How sick is that chick? She's so fucking dominant in her division, her fucking sport, period. She beat what's her name? Something Correa. Bej Correa. I forgot to pronounce her first name, the Brazilian chick that looks like a dude. In 34 seconds. Just like fucking demolished her. Like ran through her. And standing up too, which was supposed to be Correa's like strong suit. So she beat her at her home, the Brazilian's home in Brazil, at her game, and in 34 seconds. Just like caught her with some ill combinations, and to the point that Vejkura just face planted on the mat. Pop. Just knocked out. Then walked away from her and said, "Don't cry." How gangsta is that? And for those of you that didn't see it, sorry, spoiler alert. But for those of you that don't have like the background to it, it was Ronda Rousey's like completely dominates like everyone her fights. They compare it to being like the Mike Tyson of the UFC. Her last fight she won in 14 seconds. I think every other fight except one with Miesha Tate, she won in the first round. 9 out of 10 of them were like by armbar, by like the same move that she's like dope at, the submission move. And she's just a beast, like a phenom. Like you're watching like history in the making when you're watching her, and especially for such a young sport like UFC. She, what was I gonna say? She took this one like super personal. I saw like a few of like her interviews and those like 24/7s that the UFC does that they put on YouTube. They call it Embedded, and it's pretty dope because it's like 7 to 15 minute clips, and they do like 4 or 5 of them, and they follow around the fighter and like shit like that, show their interviews behind the scenes. And I saw an ESPN interview that she did, Ronda Rousey, and she explained how, like, this fight was like, Vetchkoria made it a lot more personal, because she and Ronda Rousey wanted like crying like on the interview, like tearing up and shit, which is why she told Vetchkoria, like, at the end after she knocked her out, she said don't cry, because Vetchkoria told her that, like, at the weigh-ins or something like that, and she was referring to that interview where Ronda Rousey started crying and tearing up because she, which I didn't know, her father committed suicide, and Vetchkoria was like poking fun at it and like speaking about it. They talking shit, basically, getting like in her head about her father committing suicide, which is pretty cold, but all is fair in love and war, right? Either way, that shit backfired like a motherfucker. And Ronda Rousey was saying that she on purpose wasn't going to beat her up quickly, because she just wanted her to she wanted to embarrass her and like string it along and just make her suffer for what she said. And her mother, Ronda Rousey's mother, which is like her like growing up, it was like her mentor, and she used to like bust in her room in the middle of the night and put her in an armbar and make her get out, and just like one of those sick Joe Jackson type fucking parents, but in the realm of fighting. And she was an Olympian judo practitioner, and Ronda Rousey like idolizes her. She's always like in her corner. It's like one of her coaches and everything. So she was flipping around saying that she's not going to do that. She's going to go in there and beat her ass as fast as possible, because every second that she doesn't do that, she's giving her that much more of an opportunity to like catch her with like a cheap shot or just catch her, period. You know what I mean? So she was telling her not to do that. Ronda Rousey was saying that she was going to do that. But once she got into the octagon, it was like just like lights went out in 34 seconds for Vetchkoria. So he just went at her, and it was just like relentless, like focused. And it's pretty dope to see, man. I like watching exceptional shit like that. And speaking of exceptional shit, stay tuned for the Lecture Hall audiobook, coming soon in a few minutes. What else did I want to speak to you guys about? Fuck, I want coffee. Some Bustelo right now, hit the spot. What was I gonna say? Oh, I've been listening to a couple new podcasts lately, which I wanted to shout out real quick. If any of you are fans of the Spun Today podcast, you know that I broke down like every podcast I listened to, like the dozens of them, in my very first episode, actually, of the Spun Today podcast. I think I called it Introcast, and I spoke about a bunch of different podcasts that I listened to. And lately there's so many that I always have like content to listen to, but lately I've been adding new ones, like even more Namuddin. But there's just like so much good shit out there. There's good content out there, and like listening to them. So a couple of the new ones are the Tim Ferriss Show, which I mentioned before on the podcast, and Tim Ferriss has been a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience, on the Drunken Taoist, and the Brian Callen Show, and I've heard a lot about him before. I just never listened to his particular podcast, and lately I've been listening to it. It's really dope. Check it out. I Am Rappaport. He's a cool dude. He's a funny guy. He is an actor that's been in everything. He's been like in mad shit. He was in the movie The Heat with Sandra Bullock. He was the brother of what's her name, Melissa McCarthy, I think her name is. The cop, Sandra Bullock was the FBI agent. She was like the local cop. her brother, the one that got in trouble with like the drug dealers and shit, that's Michael Rappaport. And he was in Friends. He was Phoebe's boyfriend, the cop. He played a cop on there. That was Phoebe's boyfriend. He's like that white dude with like the blonde curly hair. I think I see him, you're like, oh yeah, him. Like 1,000% you know who it is. But he has his own podcast, and I don't know, he was like that character that he normally plays, like with that accent, he just seems like straight Brooklyn, like straight New York. That's like really him. Like he's not a character. That's how he really is. Like I heard him on Bill Burr's podcast. I heard him on Joseph Vesey's podcast, which is the next one that I was about to mention. And that's him. That's how he is. He's funny as fuck. What else? Actually, no, I don't think he was on Joseph Vesey's podcast. I think he was on the About Last Night podcast with Brad Williams and Adam Ray, which was really funny also. Which actually is a nice segue. Adam Ray was also in The Heat. He was like the drug dealer dude that Sandra Bullock was trying to seduce, and she put like a tracker on his phone. He's a stand-up comic, and Brad Williams is also a stand-up comic. I heard him on, if I'm not mistaken, Good Times with Steve Simone, which is one of my favorite podcasts, and they do that podcast together, which I've heard a few episodes of, which was pretty good, and I enjoyed it. What else? I've been listening to The Callback with Joseph Vesey. I heard him for the first time. He's a stand-up comic also. He used to be a street ball player, a basketball player, like those professional street ball player dudes, which I've always been fascinated with, like the N1 and, Rucker Park and like stuff like that. Like I've always seen like clips and shit online, videos and stuff like that. He was like into that world before getting into stand-up about 2 or 3 years ago. And I heard him on Ari Shafir's podcast. And he mentioned that he has his own podcast. It seemed like a cool dude. And he also put me on to put the listeners on while he was on Ari Shafir's podcast to a dope documentary, which I'll link it in the episode notes. Let me jot it right now. Link. Jot it down right now. It's called Blackout. It's a dope documentary about Rucker Park, about the history of it, about street ball, and about this sick story of the most epic street basketball game that never happened. And it was like super anticipated. Like these people had crowds of like 20,000 people at like one point. Bill Clinton used to go to Rucker Park games. Mad NBA players used to go, including my favorite, Kobe Bryant. Carmelo, a lot of players used to go to play in it. And some NBA players were like quoted in saying, you're not a true baller until like you go play at Rucker Park. Who else? David Stern, the commissioner, he used to go to games. Like stars, celebrities, like shit like that. And Fat Joe is one that owns a team at Rucker, and he coaches it, and he's like mad into it, and always has been, supposedly for a long time. And then other stars like Jay-Z, which is one of my favorite rappers, wanted to do the same thing, but he was kind of not like about it. He was kind of doing it like as a like promotional stunt kind of thing. It seemed like, at least the way they couched the Blackout documentary, and it was just interesting seeing like all those different worlds and stuff collide and revolve around just street basketball. It was really cool. So it's called Blackout. It's on YouTube for free, and I'll link I'll link it in the episode notes. But yeah, that guy Joseph Vesey, he's funny. He put us onto it while he was on Ari Shafir's podcast, and since I've been listening to a bunch of his podcasts, he's had Chris Rock on it, Aziz Ansari, He's had Fat Joe on it in a dope 2-part interview that I listened to recently, where they get into some of that stuff. And it's pretty dope. Definitely check it out. Fitz Dog Radio is another one that I listen to. It's comedian Greg Fitzsimmons. He's been on all the podcasts, Adam Carolla's, Joe Rogan's. He's a funny dude. I like hearing him as a guest on those episodes, on those podcasts. So decided to check out his, and it's pretty dope. Also, what do I have? I have 2 more I mentioned about last night with Brad Williams and Adam Ray. I've also been listening to EMA Radio. It's a hip-hop podcast. Excuse my ad-lib is what the acronym stands for. And it's a pretty dope podcast. It goes into hip-hop and breaking down lyrics and albums. And they have like these little, I guess you call it like game shows, where like a listener will call in and they'll play some old school hip hop or R&B clip, and you have to not spit, but you have to like say like the next bar in the sequence, which is pretty cool. And they give out like gifts and stuff like that, and they get into not like in a TMZ way, like in a corny way, but they get into like different like beefs and I don't know, I guess like scandals or whatever you can call it. Like they've mentioned the Meek Mill and Drake beef that's going on right now. Like shit like that. It's pretty cool. I like it. That one's EMA Radio. Shout out to them. And which, speaking about Meek Mill and Drake, how garbage was Meek Mill's response to Drake's response to Meek Mill bitching out on Twitter? My brother put me onto it. I had only heard the Drake track that he did with Daylight, the battle rapper, which was pretty cool. I like that one. Then my brother put me onto the other 2 like more commercial responses, back to back, which was a tough tune according to Charlemagne, and it really was. It was pretty dope. The one before that, I forgot what it's called, but wasn't as good. And then Meek Mill's was just like garbage, like trash. It was like, really? Like that was trying? Like what the fuck is going on there? It was like ABC rhymes, and I don't know, just horrible. And something dope from the back-to-back one is that Drake mentions buying bottles for Charlemagne, and he did buy 6 bottles of DP and sent it over to Power 105 Studios, and Charlemagne put out a clip of him with the bottles. It's on YouTube if you guys want to check it out, saying that Drake is a man of his word. He mentioned buying him bottles, sent him over 6 bottles of Dom Perignon, and with a little note saying, "Let's be friends, Aubrey." And it's because like Charlemagne has always said that he doesn't like Drake, like because he sings and shit like that. He does that like R&B shit, which slightly, on a slight tangent, I like when Drake's line to Meek Mill when he says, "You just got bodied by a singing nigga." That was pretty funny. But yeah, Charlemagne says that he doesn't like that aspect of Drake's game, and that it's corny, and that he wouldn't do an interview with him and whatever. Like on The Breakfast Club, which is a dope show. You guys should definitely watch that. It's like, I equate it to being like podcasts. You know, it's like shooting the shit type interviews, or conversations that are more raw and like less scripted than the normal shit that you are used to seeing. So check that out if you guys want to. So it was pretty cool. And Charlemagne says that he said the same thing actually. That like that first Drake response was it was alright, it wasn't that great. And then but the back to back, he says, tough tune. which that it is. And definitely check those out. So it'll be dope if Drake actually does the Breakfast Club now that they kind of seem to at least be in the transition of smoothing over their issues. All right, so let's get into what this story is about, or the origin of this short story audiobook that you guys are about to listen to. And then I'll break down what it means to me, or like kind of breaking down the story at the end in the outro like I normally do. So I have a brief background in like real estate and mortgages from around the era that they are speaking about in the story. Like I said, the story takes place in a lecture hall in a college or university, and it's between a professor and a student that have pretty much like two different ideologies. That somebody asked them if the Great Recession is going to be like on the midterm or the final. I forget what it is. On some exam that's coming up, and then they get into sort of an exchange, or not really a debate, but a bit of an exchange. I guess you could call it a debate about who was at fault for the Great Recession, which, for those of you that don't know, like the actual catalyst of it, and at least in my opinion, I know there's a lot of other factors at play and a lot of things that were involved, but it began with this like real estate boom that we had like before 2008. And I was in real estate and mortgages for a few years, if you could call it being in it, but in and around it, from like 2002 to 2010. So I saw it, like the escalation of it, and then the drop of it in 2008, like the crash of it, and then the aftermath of it for a couple years after that, until I exited stage left and broke out from that world. So I have a little bit of like that background, and this story is not, based on, it's a fictional story. It's not based on like an actual exchange, like in the classroom or anything like that from when I was in college. But it has a lot of like background knowledge, I guess, and things and people that I was exposed to while I was in that world. And just like, I guess, like any other industry, you have, people that are trying to do the right thing by other people, and, bending over backwards to get them, good interest rates and good mortgage loans, and, they're not shady, and, they're straight up and they're real with you, and they want to, they work hard at finding you the house that you're looking for, and like stuff like that. People that take their job with like a sense of honor or nobility. Then you have snake oil salesmen that are just trying to make a buck, that are like, oh, you want A? I'll give you B because B is more accessible, and it'll be easier for me to sell you B and sell you on the idea that B is better than A, so I can, extract some money out of you and move on to the next one and do the same thing over and over. And they get into this routine of, or this mindset of cutting corners and just making money, like that being the goal, as opposed to, the helping people and make the biggest investment of their lives in most cases. And it's sad, but whatever. That's like the spectrum, right? You have the good people looking out for people, and then the bad people just looking to fuck you over and make money off of you. And like that's their primary goal. Then you have everybody else in between. Some people have a little bit of each, and whatever. It's like any other business, right? In the real estate market, there was a lot of the second type. A lot of people like getting into it to extract money at definitely other people's expenses. And predatory lending is a term that was popularized during that time period, where brokers would exactly the way it sounds, take part in predatory lending, where they, there was a lot of shady practices, sprinkled throughout the entire industry. And they would do shady shit at times, from like poor customer service to just like completely dodging people that they screwed over, and an array of things. I'm not gonna get like too into, but just like generally speaking, it was a lot of shady shit going on in that market, which is why everything ultimately fucking imploded. And this short story is kind of like the professor speaking to that, or speaking to like the issue from the mentality of the people being more at fault, the people that were taking out mortgages, which a lot of them were also, by the way. There's blame to go on both sides. There were people, consumers, that were just being slick and saying, all right, if I could buy one house and they're letting me buy two, I'm going to buy four. And, just getting in way over their heads. Then when shit hit the fan, they couldn't pay for all fucking four houses. They lost two or three of them, or maybe all four of them. And there were people like that were like too greedy with it from the consumer standpoint. And then you had like from the other ideology being argued by the student, which is one that like more like there's merits on both sides of the arguments, but the one I'm more in line with is the point of view of the student, which is more of a, the consumer being greedy like that and stuff like that. Although it's wrong, it's like a symptom of the actual issue, which is the system allowing these shady practices to take place, the system allowing for predatory lending, by having unchecked practices and unregulated little loopholes and stuff like that were crazy exploited throughout the real estate market. And it was just like an interesting exchange of those two ideologies. So when I wrote the story, it was meant to be an excerpt of a larger story, which is yet to be written, where I want to go like much more in detail into the whole real estate collapse and the ins and outs of like the Great Recession, similar to how the Big Short did with the stock market crash. But in my opinion, the real estate, and not just my opinion, it's like a popular opinion, the real estate crash and like bubble is what fed and then ultimately created the Wall Street crash. And I touch on that in this story. But yeah, like the Big Short, goes into more like the stock market, aspect of it, Lehman Brothers and everything that happened there. If you guys haven't read that book by Michael Lewis, it's a dope book called The Big Short. So definitely check that out. And so this large story that is yet to be written is it's gonna be like a Big Short version, but for like the real estate and mortgage market that prefaced the stock market collapse. And now this story, this particular exchange, is meant to be an excerpt from that larger story, which again is yet to be written. It's probably going to be like a chapter in that book down the line. It's an idea that I've had for a pretty long time, just haven't gotten it down. I guess these are this short story is like the first step in that direction. And that's pretty much it. That's what the story's about. I'm going to play it for you guys now. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Before I let you go listen to that, I just want to remind you that I do have a questionnaire available on my website for anyone who's into writing or anything creative at all, or anything that you want to share with us. It's a 5-question survey that is pretty much, asking about how you get through writer's block and just open-ended questions like that for you to share some of the shit that inspires you with us and with myself, so I can learn from it and so that I can share with the listeners. And if something you say sparks a little bit of inspiration in someone else, why not share that information? That's my outlook on that. We've had a few people fill out the surveys in the past. You can check those out in some of the free writing episodes, where I read them at the end of the episode. And I will keep you completely anonymous if you request me to, which is an option on the actual form that you can fill out at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so by following me on Twitter and Instagram at Spun Today, by liking the Facebook fan page at facebook.com/Spun Today, and signing up to the newsletter, which you can do on that Facebook page. Also, definitely rate and review the podcast on iTunes and or Stitcher. I would really appreciate that. That's what helps the podcast gain exposure and listenership, etc. So definitely do that. Rate and review the podcast on iTunes and or Stitcher. And then if you can help out the podcast financially by shopping on Amazon, which you guys probably do already, but instead of going to Amazon.com, go to spuntoday.com and then click on the contact page. At the very top center of the contact page, there's a banner for Amazon, which when you click on takes you to Amazon.com. But just by taking that slight little detour to my website and then clicking on the Amazon banner, Amazon kicks me back a small percentage of your purchases. It does not increase your purchases at all, but they kick me back a small percentage just for driving traffic to their website from mine. And that would help support the podcast financially, and I would really appreciate that very much. And what else? Check out the YouTube page like I told you guys before. Check out the promo for this story. If you're about to listen to this story, listen to that promo. I think I did a good job of summarizing it. And let me know what you guys think. Also, all the podcasts will always be available on YouTube, and as well as on my website, spuntoday.com/podcast. And also on Tumblr, spuntodaypodcast.tumblr.com, if that's what you're into. Now, without further ado, here is the audiobook Lecture Hall. Lecture Hall by Tony Ortiz. Written June 27th, 2015. Will the Great Recession be on the midterm, Professor? Absolutely. And here's the type of essay I'm looking for, folks. Show the understanding that the catalyst was the burst of the tech bubble in the early 2000s. People began to search for safer investments, and they settled on real estate. In turn, home demands rise while supply falls. And what does that do to the price, class? It drives it up, responded a student from the back of the lecture hall. Correct, whoever that was, responded the professor. It drives prices up, which artificially inflates the home values. So what then? Houses across the nation are now worth more than ever before in recorded history. And here's where individual greed comes in. People owe less than what their homes are now artificially inflated to be worth. That spread between the value and what is owed is called equity. And what do? They can't leave well enough alone. No. They borrow against that equity. They buy other houses, cars, boats, luxury items that they don't need. Greed is good, huh? Not in this case. But Professor, hold on, David. Let me finish this point first. As the spread continued to increase, some of these people took out second mortgages and lines of credit, using their homes as ATM machines. We were in the midst of the next bubble, folks, and most of us didn't see it. Values kept going up, skyrocketing in some regions, but we missed the forest for the trees. Then Wall Street, which was fueled by their own greed, created financial instruments known as mortgage-backed securities. Think of them as stocks or bonds that were made up of a collection of mortgages that were bundled up and sold by the share to the general public. The thing is, that these mortgage-backed securities weren't just made up of mortgages that were in good standing. They'd also include these doomed-to-fail subprime mortgages. They bundled them up together and sold them to the world, infesting the globe. This leads me to my next point that your essays should cover. What exactly is the subprime mortgage market? Well, Wall Street wasn't satiated with the millions of dollars this market was generating. Nope, they wanted even more. Their greed needed to be fed. So the banks that you and I go to for a mortgage began to loosen up their guidelines for mortgage qualifications. This way, they'd have more mortgages on their books to feed Wall Street with. You no longer needed a 720 credit score, a 680 score would do. You didn't need 20% down payment plus closing costs. Just come up with 10% plus closing costs. If you build it, they will come. And so they, the borrowers, came. But why is that the consumer's fault? Blurted out a student from the back of the lecture hall. Because there's something called personal responsibility. That's why. Nobody can exercise that for you. As I was saying, after the banks lowered mortgage qualifying requirements and Wall Street successfully sold off those securities, they lowered requirements even more. Soon, you didn't need a down payment, and closing costs weren't required either. They rolled up all of your costs into your mortgage loan. Can't pay for the appraisal out of pocket? Don't worry, we'll roll that cost in too. Some big banks like Countrywide, which, to give you a bit of context, in 2006, Countrywide financed 20% of all mortgages in the United States at a value of about 3.5% of the United States GDP, as well as a handful of lesser-known fly-by-night banks that popped up to exploit, even offered up to 106% financing. I'll say that again. 106% financing. That means that in some cases, you were paid to take a mortgage. They paid you to buy a house. I shit you not. But we, the consumer, kept taking and taking and taking. Word to the wise, folks. If it seems too good to be true, it is. Questions? Comments? David raises his hand again. I have a question. Go ahead, David, said Professor Nachman. You say that consumer greed is at the root of this issue, right? Not just consumer greed, responded Professor Nachman, but greed in general. Bank greed, Wall Street greed, human greed. The blame goes all around. Well, I don't think I agree with you, Professor. Fair enough. Tell us why you don't, responded Professor Nachman, as he leaned on the front of his desk to listen. I guess greed does play into it, David continued. A general people wanting what they can't have, coupled with being told that they can now have all those things. But I wouldn't blame it solely on greed. There are absolutely other factors at play, young David. Just none as strong or as underlying as greed. That's just it. I don't think everyone involved is necessarily being greedy. There's plenty to say about predatory lending, about lack of regulation, about manipulation and exploitation of a weak system. David, if you're a minimum wage worker at the local supermarket, for example, you should have the common sense that you have no place purchasing a $400,000 home. And then on top of that, an additional $100,000 line of credit against that same home, which you use to buy a new car, a big screen TV. That's living beyond your means. That's exercising zero personal responsibility. But don't banks have a fiduciary responsibility to be truthful? Don't banks have personal responsibility not to fuck over their customers? Watch that tone. I'm sorry, Professor, it's frustrating. That mentality. My aunt, for example, came to this country 12 years ago. She worked 10 to 12-hour days, 6 days a week, making sure my cousins never wanted for clothes on their backs or food in their mouths. She even took me in for a year when my parents died in their accident. And she did it alone. But I guess she should have had the personal responsibility to pick a better husband, right? What's your point, David? The point is that she's a hard worker that scraped together her life savings of $10,000 to buy a house. She put all her eggs in one basket because that's all her local mortgage broker told her she needed. She would finally be able to fulfill the American dream for her and her family. He told her that her mortgage would be even less than what she was currently paying for rent because of an interest rate special he could get her for being a first-time homebuyer and for being a single, hardworking Latina woman. He even told her that he could get her a line of credit for a new car too. But she didn't bite on that one. She got the house with only $10,000 down on the sales contract. Closing costs were rolled into her new loan. He didn't tell her, however, about the several $100s more per month that she would have to pay for PMI, private mortgage insurance, because she didn't make a down payment of 20%. And of course didn't mention the taxes and insurance because everyone, including first-time homebuyers, should know that, right? Instead, he misleads her by quoting only the principal and interest payment and conveniently leaving out the rest. But it's okay. She's hardworking and knew things couldn't just go 100% smooth. Fine. She picked up a part-time job on Sundays to make ends meet. In her mind, working 7 days a week is worth her children having a taste of the American dream. You want to know what he didn't tell her, though? What's that? That the type of loan he gave her was a 6-month ARM. She had an introductory teaser rate, meaning her interest rate and mortgage payment was locked in for only 6 months. Thereafter, it would more than double. She went back to the broker thinking surely this has been some kind of mistake. He told her he'd look into it, strung her along, avoiding her calls for over 2 weeks. After that, when she showed up at his office again, he told her there was nothing he could do except refinance her into a 30-year fixed rate loan, but it would cost her another $10,000 in closing costs, and her total monthly payment would go down by only about $150. Long story short, the bank foreclosed and she lost the house. She lost it all. Now she's back in the Dominican Republic with her 2 kids. And her story is far from unique, by the way. What happened to the bank having fiduciary responsibility to their customers? What happened to walking into the biggest investment of your life and not having to worry about snake oil salesmen? Let me ask you something, David. What happened to your aunt's personal responsibility? What happened to your aunt knowing the limits of what she could afford? Folks, there are bad people out there. They'll always be there. We can't nerf the world in order to shield the rest of us from them. That's not how we win. We win by being accountable for our actions, for knowing what we're getting ourselves into. You're being disingenuous, Professor. Excuse me? And unrealistic, too. What you're saying makes sense for us, the younger generation, those of us lucky enough to be learning this stuff in college. But what about my aunt? What about the immigrants that are preyed upon? What about the hardworking Americans even that left school because they chose to nobly put their family's needs before their own and went to work in order to provide for them? They obviously don't have the same information, so fuck them. Survival of the fittest, basically. Watch your language in my classroom. Sorry, I guess I just don't know any better. But you know what, Professor? It shouldn't be okay to screw over the less fortunate and squeeze out every last dime out of them just because you can. And what's worse is that they continue to do so without repercussion. That's the issue. You say that bad people will exist. Agreed. But we shouldn't have to write that off as the cost of doing business. Assholes need to be checked. Bad business practices regulated in a direct and unilateral way. Attacking the root of the issue instead of hacking away at the symptomatic branches, to paraphrase Thoreau. Big government and regulation stifles progress and ingenuity. Does it always? Can it also allow progress and ingenuity to be free to thrive without corporate special interest intervention like the New Deal did with Social Security and other programs during the Great Depression? In the long run, the invisible hand prevails and the markets balance themselves out.
so long as people remain content with knowing that ditch diggers and maids can't buy mansions. I agree with personal responsibility to a degree, but the underlying issue with that is that everyone can't know everything. The maid that walks into a bank with her life savings shouldn't leave thinking she has a home and find out 6 months later that she barely has a shirt on her back. And her children shouldn't have to decide between either breakfast or lunch because some unregulated banker wanted to add a diving board to the pool at his family's summer home. Tread lightly on that regulation slippery slope that you're on, David. You may regret it in the future. Your generation doesn't get to tell ours what to do anymore. Okay, that's enough, said Professor Nachman. And it starts here, with this conversation. With doing what we can to help shift the collective consciousness into a space where we don't have a pass-the-buck mob mentality, where personal responsibility is balanced with unilateral repercussions. A dash of good old common sense could go a long way. Bell rings, class ends.
All right, guys, that is the episode. Actually, not the episode. That's the audiobook portion of the episode. Let me know what you guys think. What did you think of the story? I'm going to tell you guys what I thought of the story, and then you can match it up to what you think of the story, and realize that you're wrong and I'm right. No, I'm joking. Everybody gets different shit from different things, right? So here's what I got from this story. The two main characters of the story being the professor and the student that get into the exchange or have generally two different ideologies, two different mentalities, two different approaches to the same problem. And the professor seems to have more of a black and white, this is the issue, this is why it's an issue type of outlook on it, which in a lot of cases, like I mentioned in the intro, has its merits. And the student has more of a nuanced kind of outlook on the situation, where he's not discounting all the other factors that are definitely at play, which the professor acknowledges, but kind of discounts it faster than anything else, and saying, kind of putting more weight on if people individually would be less greedy, then all this shit would go away. And I think the student is a bit more realistic in that he understands that the greed is going to be there, but just taking that out of the equation is not going to change the underlying issue, which is the fact that the foundation or the system allows this type of behavior to happen. It's set up in a way where if this happens, it's not a shock, it's not a surprise, because the system is set up that in a way where this can't happen. So if you allow the possibility of it, then when it happens, you can't bitch about it, kind of thing. So, so they're coming from those two backgrounds. The professor spits some knowledge with a lot of stats, which are, by the way, fact-checked by myself before writing this stuff. So, feel free to do your own fact-checking, but trust that I did it. I'm not just spitting out numbers, like in terms of where I say that in 2006, Countrywide financed 20% of all mortgages in the United States at a value of about 3.5% of the United States GDP, which is fucking sick. Like a sick amount of fucking mortgages. A sick amount of anything. Fucking when you're breaking into the percentages of GDP of the United States, it's like you're talking big dog shit right there. And so I fact check a lot of that stuff. What kind of Mickey Mouse operation you think I'm running here at the Spun Today podcast? Also, like the credit score requirements and like stuff like that I mentioned. That's just from being in real estate and mortgages and the knowledge that I derived from being in that world, in that realm. And the 106% financing, and like all that type of shit. It's all that I bring with me from that era. So yeah, the professor spits out a lot of that knowledge, and which is important, very important to the story. What else? The kid is coming from. He's a little bit defensive. He has something that the professor doesn't have, which is the personal touch, the personal aspect of the story of knowing someone, namely his aunt, who was a victim of predatory lending, and it kind of like hit close to home. So he's a bit more skeptical about like the whole system and everything that was going on. Whereas the professor seemingly is like reading about the story from a textbook, and this kid is like living it firsthand through his aunt and his experiences with her. He also lost his parents in an accident, which I didn't get into detail about in the story. I did mention it in that promo that I mentioned that I did, which hopefully you guys listened to me and went back to listen to if you haven't already, because that kind of gives a little bit of like character depth and context to his character. He lost his parents in like a car accident at a young age. It was I guess you could estimate it, like about maybe sophomore year, junior year in high school. Because then he moved in with his aunt. He had to leave like his old neighborhood and stuff like that. Moved in with his aunt for about a year until she wound up losing the house, and now he's in college. So that's pretty much the timeline with that. And he is kind of like one of those go hard students that, you know, gets good grades in every class. And he mentions a quote from Thoreau, which is I paraphrase it in the story, but the actual quote I'm trying to think of is, which is, for every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there's one striking at the root. That was Henry Thoreau. So he, the student is, like I was saying, like one of those go hard students that gets good grades in every classroom, and, you know, brings in, he's obviously taking some sort of like philosophy course during the semester, and he's pulling like the information from there into his, you know, personal like development of a person. You know, you're in college, you're developing, you're learning new shit, being exposed to new ideas, and, you know, he's taking in the stuff that resonates with him, and namely being that type of that Henry Thoreau quote, and, you know, bringing it into this economics class that he's in. And what else? The professor also seems to be a bit stubborn, kind of like, this is what it is, this is the answer to this question, and you're wrong, kind of thing. He kind of seems open to the exchange a little bit, but in a resistant kind of way. And I think he's being like a little like PC when it comes to, oh yeah, tell us why, tell us what you think. Just, you know, from that, I'm the professor, so I have to let them think that they have a choice, kind of thing, like to the students. And yeah, but he's not, he's really like set in his ways, in my opinion. And then the kid on the other end of the spectrum, he's more, he has like this grandiose type of, you know, single-handedly going to change the world type of mentality that a lot of high school and college kids have, and where their heart is in the right place, but it's a touch unrealistic at the same time. But the story rounds off with pointing out that you need that kind of, which I agree with, you need that kind of mentality to begin shifting the collective consciousness of a generation in the right direction. And it goes to something that I've spoken about in the past in other episodes, where it's to enact that type of change or any type of significant change, it's going to have to be with incremental, from our vantage point, it's going to be with incremental little baby steps like this, like beginning with conversations like this, beginning with podcasts, beginning with exposure to these new ideas, and just slightly, changing course by a degree or two. And then in the long run, we're going to see the benefits of taking those brave, albeit small, steps towards that direction. That's what I got from the story. Oh, and by the way, a little tidbit, a little background. The name of the professor, Professor Nachman, is actually based on the professor that the name is based on, has nothing to do with how the professor was. He was actually a science teacher in high school that I had. But it was the name of a professor or a teacher that I had in high school where I met my now fiance, actually. Just thought that was funny. I was thinking of a teacher name and, why not use that one? He was a cool dude, though, the real one. This guy in the story was a douche. And yeah, folks, that's pretty much it. That's what I thought of the story. Let me know what you think of the story by going to spuntoday.com/short stories/lecture hall and just writing in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Tell me what your take on the story was. Or email me at spuntoday@gmail.com or by filling out my contact sheet on the contact page of the spuntoday.com website. Like I mentioned before, if you want to support the podcast, you can do so in several ways by rating and reviewing the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. That would be the best way, which I would appreciate the most. Also, if you want to support financially, do your shopping on Amazon by clicking on the Amazon banner on my website, on the contact page of my website, and it'll take you over to Amazon and you do your shopping like normal. It does not cost you anything extra, but Amazon kicks me back a percentage for driving traffic to their website. You can also check out some of my photography at created, CRATED, created.com/spun today, and where you can actually order posters and prints and like frames and shit like that of any of the pictures that you might like. I actually took some pictures at the beach yesterday, and I'm going to post those onto the website, which you guys can view and like download for free or whatever on spuntoday.com/photography if you just want like the digital copies. But yeah, if you want like prints and stuff like that of any of them, you can check them out on that other website, Created. What else? Fill out that questionnaire and I will read your responses on the next free writing episode of the podcast. That's the questionnaire located at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. And aside from that, listen to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher. You can listen to it on YouTube or on Tumblr as well. And follow me on Twitter at Spun Today or on Instagram at Spun Today. And like the Facebook fan page, facebook.com/Spun Today. As always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening.